Royal Television. We inspire.
Hello there, and thank you for joining me in another edition of the program Eye on Nigeria, where we discuss policies, development and conflict issues. Basically, Nigeria standing amongst the Committee of Nations. My name is Femi Tunde Okunlola, your host. Today on the program, we'll discuss the update on the recovery of looted funds, which the present administration in Nigeria promised and vowed to pursue upon assuming office. The much-awaited list is finally out, with about $9.1 billion being listed has been recovered in recent times. However, there's a hitch somewhere. Backtracking on an earlier made promise to release the names of the looters alongside the figures, the federal government recently, in its statement, said, well, it was abstaining from doing that for legal reasons and to also avoid a situation where those who might probably want to come forward to return some more monies might be hindered from doing so. Today on the program, we'll discuss the two sides of the divide: to shame walk and name these names of these looters, or to let justice take its course and wait for due process here. Today we'll discuss this on the program. But first, a timeout. And welcome back to the program Eye on Nigeria, where today we're discussing the recovery of the looted funds. About $9.1 billion has been listed as figures recently recovered by the federal government. We discussed this and the recent backtracking by the federal government and reneging on its promise to release the names alongside these figures. It cited legal reasons and a situation where it was avoiding preventing several individuals from stepping forward to give back some of this monies. I'm not alone in the studio today. I'm joined by my guest. I'm joined by Associate Professor Fatai Aremu, a political science expert. Sir, it's good to have you join me in the program again today. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Let's get started. The federal government is saying the total funds it has recovered or is set to recover is in excess of $10 billion and more than $200 billion. That's a lot of money. Now, the impact of having these funds handed back to us as a nation at this present time, that's speaking about economically speaking, at this point in time.
Well, thank you, FTU, our viewers at home. I think there is no better time to have this kind of funds injected into the Nigerian economy than now that the country is facing serious contraction as a result of the decline in the collapse of the global oil market. Our export is declining because of the crisis in Niger Delta, and the price per barrel of oil is also coming down. So if we put this together, there is serious financial constraints on the federal government. So if you have this kind of massive injection of funds into the economy, it's a way of kind of reflating, injecting life into the economy. So it's going to help a great deal.
All right. Well, let's talk about the processes. We've heard a lot about some of these processes. What's that intricate dance like, the process of recovering some of this monies? To a lot of people, it's get in there, we have so monies here, get out of the situation. But it does seem to look more complex than envisaged.
Well, I mean, once you have this kind of crisis, there are different layers to it. The first layer is the first prove, investigate, and get the evidence to the effect that, okay, Mr. X is having Y amount of money that belongs to the government of the Federation illegally. So we have to first be able to prove that this is the case. So it's not easy. Second, you have to also be sure that the exact amount that you're talking about is to the value that the government was actually defrauded of, if we may use that word. So it takes a lot of efforts, a lot of tactics, a lot of techniques that are really, really complicated to be able to get to the facts of these kind of issues.
Wow. And then one of the techniques that seem to be that of plea bargaining, or the option of plea bargaining, and the option of going to court. And somewhere in the mix, you have to deal with other countries who have their own rules and regulations regarding this. Let's talk about the route of plea bargaining, which seems to have been exploited or is being exploited by those concerned at this point in time. Some Nigerians have their concerns about this process itself, the carrot and stick approach.
Yeah, I mean, plea bargaining is very useful because it saves a lot of time, saves a lot of resources. To be able to retrieve this money, some of them are hidden in jurisdictions that Nigerians don't have bilateral agreement with. So it means that you have to start from the scratch, having to enter into some ad hoc treaties with them to allow the processes to begin, and if successful, to be able to repatriate those funds. So it takes a lot of time. Second thing is that it costs a lot of money because you need to hire international lawyers. You need to hire lawyers that are familiar with this kind of thing. You need to hire forensic experts from all over the world to be able to track and trace and provide evidence so that you can be able to prosecute accordingly in those jurisdictions. So it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of time. So if you have some of the parties who are willing to come forward to say, okay, yeah, it's true, I have this amount, X amount of money, and I'm willing to provide. If I can't provide all, I'll be able to provide 80%, 70% of this, because 30% I can't be able to account for it anymore. So the federal government can then be able to say, okay, fine. If you're able to do this, then we are also going to do this kind of thing. But what the federal government has done, what the president has said is that even if you enter into plea bargain, even if you return some funds, you'll still be prosecuted anyway. So which is a kind of disincentive to some people who want to enter into some kind of arrangement.
You're watching the program Eye on Nigeria, and we're discussing the recovery of the looted funds, a process that is still ongoing. It's still expecting some more funds. The federal government did state earlier on that it was expecting about $200 billion. Thus far, $9.1 billion has been returned back. And we're discussing the process. One of the techniques being used, of course, is plea bargaining, which some people seem to have a problem with at this point in time. Well, again, the argument, some view this as a betrayal on an earlier made promise, saying, well, perhaps the federal government might have been hoodwinked or might have had its hands tied with some of this plea bargaining arrangements and agreements that must have come in place. So let's talk about the decision not to name names as earlier promised.
Well, the issue of naming or not naming has different angles to debate. First, some people will want to argue that if you name the supposed or the alleged looters, it might be sub judice somehow, because some of them are actually ongoing in courts, and by the time you pronounce them as having looted funds, and these cases are still ongoing, it's like you are giving verdict on them already, which will be prejudicial. I mean, it's not in the interest of the judicial process. Some people also feel that, okay, if somebody refunds the money and is cooperating in the process of investigation, if you then name such a person, then you shame the person, you destroy the character of that person, and debase it such that the person, even though he has cooperated all the way, you imperil his ability to be able to do business with his partners all over the world, because the name is no longer there. So it will be double jeopardy. Despite cooperating, you still subject him to this kind of emotional strains and shame. So some people feel that maybe on that ground, maybe naming the names may not be appropriate. But there are those who still feel that, no, I mean, you collected this amount of money from these people, so it's better to put the names against them. And it also gives the people the opportunity to come out to say, no, this amount of money I gave you is more than what you are tagging against my name. In a way, it will also allow some people to reclaim their integrity, because whether we like it or not, the names will be out. The public will eventually know who are the people. Maybe people already, some of the names are even online.
All right.
So there is nothing to hide. So if Mr. X is accused of taking $2 billion, for example, and he has refunded the $2 billion. At the time he was taking it, he didn't know that this money was actually illegal or was meant for a different purpose.
Right.
It was given to him because he was holding a particular position and was expected to perform some political functions, and he was given the money to mobilize people. Innocently, he took the money. Now he realized that the source of this money is questionable, and he came forward to say, okay, they gave me this amount of money, this is the money. Now, if he refunds 2 billion, and what the government puts on his name happened to be 1.5 billion, he could come out to say, no, I gave you 2 billion.
All right, because
and that will allow him to reclaim his integrity. So yes, I'm coming out to say this happened and I didn't like it. I'm not that kind of person. I have refunded the money.
Because the discussion at the moment seems to be about the integrity of the supposed looters right here at this point in time. But who puts checks on the federal government itself, saying how much of these monies are we sure are being listed out accurately at this point in time? So the federal government says it will release the monies it will release the list eventually, but again there are doubts as to if we'll have all these names listed out, or based on the plea bargaining agreement, if we'll have some names hidden from the list.
You see, there are different issues to this, because first, not all these looted cases, these cases of looted funds, they are not the same. They are in different categories. Some of them are already recovered. Some of them are in the process of being forfeited. Some of them are in the process of being investigated. So there are some of these that once you name the names, doesn't pose any judicial problem, doesn't pose any legal question. The second thing that we need to note is that different organizations are involved in the process of this investigation and recovery and forfeiture. We have the DSS involved, we have the EFCC involved, we have the ICPC involved. We even have some other organizations also doing the same thing. Now, there's one particular case that I'm aware of, not too far from where my office is in Maitama. The house was sealed up. And the day the security operatives came, we were told that they moved out a huge amount of money from that particular building. Now, nobody would know exactly how much was moved out of that building, except the person that put it there. So without placing names on this, you don't give people the opportunity to also cross-check the institutions, because we can't really trust this institution, because it is the institutions that are reporting this. So we don't know whether the actual figure they are bringing down are actually the actual figure they took from those people. So without providing the name, because now we are seeing them as a pool. Seeing them as a pool doesn't allow for transparency and full disclosure. So at some point, I think the government will have to come out with the names of the people and how much, and tag the names with the amount that we're taking from them.
Again, this is the program Eye on Nigeria. We're discussing the much talked about, publicized refusal of the government to reel out the names as earlier promised. It does cite legal reasons. Let's take this time out and place a call to a legal expert, Barrister Tayo Oniyede, an international law expert who will be shedding some light on the legal angles on the show right now.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Hello, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Paula.
All right. I want to ask, in the studio today, we're discussing the recent decision, the government's rescinding on the decision to name and shame walk the looters, which has caused a lot of controversial debate at this point in time. The government seems to base its decision on the legal situation on ground. Can you please explain that situation to us? How does naming the looters affect ongoing investigations?
Okay, that's all right. It's my pleasure. Now, the starting point is that the money that have so far been recovered were recovered by virtue of the investigation conducted by agencies of the federal government.
All right.
We'll start with that. The next issue is this, and it is not in doubt that in Nigeria we operate the rule of law.
Mm-hmm.
The nature of the offense committed, if any, is criminal in nature. The pronouncement of guilt or otherwise is the sacred duty of the courts. Until that is done by the court, it is defamatory to tag any individual a looter. We can't get to that point. We can't do that. The presumption of innocence is clear by our section 36(5) of the Constitution. It is fundamental, and you and I cannot compromise it. You know? And so I agree with the reasoning of the federal government for suspending naming the looters, but they gave details of the loot. If you name the looters at this point, it's even wrong at the moment to call a person a looter because there is no basis for it. Well, until all that is done by the court.
Oh, all right, sir. The issue has been taken to be that of jurisprudence. Well, if the investigation or law process prevents us from knowing who the these people are, shouldn't the same inconclusive investigation forbid us from labeling them as looters, which seems to be the case right now?
That's exactly what I am saying, but it is safer to even say that now. You can say that there are looters, provided you have not mentioned them. No offense has been committed. Right. Nobody can pin himself down as a thief because you have not tagged anybody. So that's the intention of the federal government. And that is that to expose people who have stolen Nigerian money.
Right.
That is right. That is correct. That is in our interest. But the question is, before you get to the point of attaching an individual to the name looter, then you have to be very careful. Otherwise, it will raise a lot of other fundamental issues. And it might get to a point that the federal government might not be able to bear themselves.
Wow.
So I agree with them. The jurisprudential thinking has to be the one done with patience.
Wow.
These people would still be named on the long run. And then it's a matter of suspending naming looters at the moment. Not that they will not be named, but due process has to be followed before you get to that point.
All right, then. Well, I thank you so much, sir, for giving us your time.
It's my pleasure, Mr.
And that was a phone conversation with an international law expert, Barrister Tai Oniyede, who had a lot to say about it. Back to the conversation in the studio here, where I've got Associate Professor Fatai Aremu, a political scientist. Thank you so much for joining me once again. One of the things that was said was as regards how this could impact and deter other people from coming forward, and it could also be seized upon by those presently persecuted, because until a man is judged guilty, he remains innocent. That's what the law says. Let's talk about the many angles to this. Now, we have a scenario where we have those who are in the court as we speak right now. We have another scenario where we have some people coming secretly out to return some of these funds. And there are thoughts that things will not be the same any longer. How does this impact the fight on corruption? Because obviously not everybody gets the same judgment at the end of the day.
Well, I mean, to be frank with you, when you look at the way the process is going, you can see some dynamics at play in it. You can see what sociologists may call intense class politics. Now, if you have a banker, a middle-level banker, who had stolen maybe 5 million naira or 2 million naira, there is no question about protecting his identity. There will be full disclosure about his name. Sometimes he will even be declared wanted, and then he will be prosecuted in public, without hiding any identity. So, these people are not a legal person, but I know that publishing the name, we don't know whether publishing the names of these people constitutes passing a verdict on them. Mr. X has Y amount of money, and we are in the process of recovering this amount of money, or we have recovered the money. So whether it will act as a disincentive to other people from coming forward is not a question at all. If you have public funds stashed away in your coffers illegally, the government must pursue such people and bring them to justice. The government cannot wait for them to come forward. So it's not a question of whether they like to come forward or they don't like to come forward. They must. If they don't, then government can bring the full weight of the law on them. So we shouldn't wait until they come forward. They don't have a choice. They have to. So the question of whether... So in order not to be seen as being unfair, as being unjust, because we have named people petty thieves, petty whose identity are always in the public domain. So if we have seen that these people have taken some money that belongs to everyone illegally, so why should we protect them?
Let's talk about what comes in line with a shame walking, like a lot of people seem to be suggesting at this point in time. Shame walking, these names, what impact does that have in our society?
Yeah, I mean, that's the first question. Whether it's has any weight or it leads to some practical action, or
in other climes it basically makes or destroys individuals in our community, in our society today. What impact would that have? Because obviously we have to decide if we want to shame walk these individuals or have our monies back, and the money does seem to be more important, realistically.
Well, it's not
speaking.
Naming them is not just about having the money back, and it's not about shaming them. It's about disclosure. It's about transparency. It's about accountability, letting the public know what's happening. So it goes beyond just shame walking them. Okay, now this is class conspiracy sort of, because they are big people, they are big thieves, they have taken so much money, but those who steal so little money don't get this kind of protection. So I mean, it should prick our conscience, and it should prick the conscience of everyone at home, that whether they deserve, if it is true that they are holding these monies illegally, I don't think they are entitled to any kind of protection. And I don't think it goes beyond just shame. It's just about the public having to know how much this money were recovered from those people who have taken them illegally.
And either ways, again, I did ask the question earlier on about how this impacts on the war of corruption. Does this in any way boost it, or does it drop it somewhat?
Well, when it comes to the broader war on corruption, I have my reservations on that, to be frank with you, because these are ad hoc, piecemeal approaches. They are not institutional, and they are not systematic. So we have not designed effective institutions to be able to nip in the bud and prevent these kind of things from happening in the future. And if they do happen, I don't think we are building the institutional capacity to be able to deal effectively with these things. We are, to the extent that we are discussing this publicly, is a huge movement forward. But we also have to broaden this dragnet. First, to ensure that people are well educated and they are aware of the sanctions that are attached to corruption. Second, the institutions have automatic triggers that will switch into action whenever there is small signal of this about to happen, so that we will never get to this kind of stage again in the future.
All right. Again, the federal government is saying that the monies it is set to recover, or has recovered, assets and all, totals about $10 billion, and is still set to recover about $200 billion here. Let's talk about the journey from here, with many of the view and opinion that we still have a long journey ahead of us. Whether we'll be able to recover all $200 billion is one a lot of people still ask questions about going at this pace. But of course, it is a huge step because the process has already begun. Now, what do we need to put in place to make the rest of this process smoother in terms of institutions and all of that? How institution-driven are these processes we've put in place?
Well, that's a billion-dollar question, because I mean, first there are 3 stages involved in this. There's a stage of prevention, so that this thing doesn't happen at all. If it then happens, then there is the process of investigation, of gathering evidence. Then you have the process of prosecution. Have we
started mastering any of this?
So yeah, now this is a little bit haphazard. The different institutions are doing their own thing. DSS is doing its own thing, EFCC is doing its own thing, and ICPC is also doing its own thing, and maybe the police, Special Financial Fraud Unit, or what they call it, is also doing its own thing. So you have different institutions usually working without one speaking to the other. The interagency cooperation is a little bit limited. So the process of investigation is a little not well organized as at present, and the kind of tools, techniques, sophisticated techniques. In most cases, when they want to investigate these high-level transnational crimes, they have to hire international consultants, which costs a lot of money. So we have a lot of things to do in terms of building our institutions. First, to be able to prevent and nip in the bud so that this doesn't happen. And whenever it does happen, then they develop a robust ability to investigate and track, trace, and collect hard evidence to be able to prosecute. Then the prosecutorial process should also be very efficient, very, very short in terms of time, and it should be concluded quickly, and the sanctions are meted on the culprit as quickly as possible. So in terms of building our institutions, this is where we need to do a lot of work. I mean, I don't see that happening very well right now.
All right. You don't see that happening very well right now. With the conversations still going on the social media, on the sidewalk, what happens, in the words of one very, very interested participant on the social media outlet, it says, lest we have the same goats in the barnyard, wouldn't it be necessary here? And some other people say, well, to name the looters or to get the monies back, especially at this point in time when the country does need every penny it can lay its hands upon. That's the question. Oh, thank you so much for tuning in to and listening and watching another edition of the program Eye on Nigeria. A big thank you to my guest, Associate Professor Fataram. Well, thank you so much for giving us your time on the show. That's it. It's a wrap on the show. Until the next time when we come up to discuss another interesting edition, well, it's bye for now.